Gosh, it was good to get the Aston motoring again, and to open her up down those long and usually deserted French straights. What a contrast to southern England with its twisty lanes and hedgerows, and where just a half a dozen cars always seems to make a traffic jam. We seemed to get to Le Mans in no time. This circuit has been the same 13.5 kilometers long since 1932, so we didn't expect to find any changes when it came to our now traditional tour around the circuit. And Le Mans would not be Le Mans if we didn't stop at the Hippodrome restaurant, halfway down the straight for lunch. The collection of cars on show was as mouth-watering as the food. Anything red had to be Italian, and we spotted this delectable and rare little nine. The sight of service trucks boosted the adrenaline for the forthcoming race. The rondelle-flanked DB panel reminded us of the keen French interest in the small capacity class up to 750cc and in the index of fuel efficiency. British mass production sports cars were represented by Triumph with their TR2. After their reliable if uncompetitive run last year, Austin Healey had stayed away, complaining that the allowing in of prototypes spoiled the spirit of Le Mans. We arrived at the circuit. The car parks were filling up rapidly, and so was the sky. Rain threatened. The airfield, just across the road behind the main grandstands, was nearly as crammed with light aircraft as the car parks. Unlike the C-type, the D-type is of aluminium monocoque construction. Without the out-and-out power of the 4.9-litre Ferraris, Jaguar would be relying on superior road holding, and especially on its disc braking, particularly in the wet. William Lyons and driver Peter Walker looked happy enough, but perhaps they'd heard the weather forecast. Ferrari had 3 cars entered, all 375 Plus models with its 4.9-litre engines. Their drivers included Froilán González, Maurice Trintignant, Umberto Maglioli and Marzotto. The works cars were backed up by Luigi Cinetti's 4.5-litre coupe, down to be driven by Count Baggio and the Playboy Portofirio Rubirosa. The French Gordini team had 4 cars, and Briggs Cunningham had a Cunningham-bodied Ferrari 375 Plus to complement his own 2 C4 Cunninghams. The American millionaire looked confident as he approached his 5th attempt at a Le Mans victory. We saw Bill Spear looking down at the new quadruple downdrafts on the V8 Chrysler engine in the C4. Aston Martin had arrived with no less than 5 cars, the V12 Lagonda for Eric Thompson and Dennis Poore, and 4 DB3Ss, of which 2 were coupes. Roy Salvadori, Reg Parnell and team manager John Wyer could be seen discussing tactics. There was a DB3S in American colours to be driven by Texan Carroll Shelby, accompanied by Belgian Paul Frere. The Siamese Prince, Bira, was with team owner David Brown. And there was a privately entered DB3S. Fraser Nash were back with 3 cars, all using the aging 2-litre Bristol engine with its not quite overhead cams. The same engine is used by Bristol itself. British debutants were Kieft, famous for their 500cc Formula 3 cars, and the little French-bid Constantine Special was based on Peugeot mechanicals and was supercharged. Porsche defending their title in the 1500cc class, but also had 2 1100cc cars. As the magic hour of 4 o'clock approaches, French television went on air, and the drivers took their places, ready for the sprint across the road. At long last, they were off, and first away was Briggs Cunningham in the number 1 car. But he was soon devoured by the scarlet Ferrari of Gonzalez, heading a train of 57 starters up to the Dunlop Bridge. At the end of the first lap, it was Ferrari 1, 2, 3, with Jaguars, headed by Moss 4th, 1953 winner Tony Rolt in the 5th place car, and Ken Wharton 6th, with a damaged nose following a first lap nudging session. Before long, Moss and Rolt had pushed the 3rd Ferrari down to 5th, and Eric Thompson had spun the evil-handling Lagonda at the S's and retired with irreparable damage to his rear lamps. It got gloomier and gloomier, and drizzle set in, but despite this, Gonzalez kept breaking the lap record. The Bristol coupes were, as ever, a model of consistency, but were already lapped by the D-types. Manzon, too, was lapping back markers, including the little Constantine. Behind the Ferraris and Jaguars, and in 6th place, lay the leading Cunningham, the American-entered Ferrari disguised to look like a Cunningham, being driven by Johnny Fitch and Phil Walters. The DB3S Coupe number 21 was driven by Graham Whitehead, but later was crashed by Jimmy Stewart. The 1952 winner, Louis Rosier, had now taken over the number 3 Ferrari from Roberto Manzon, and with Ferraris 1, 2 and 3 again, Moss hurried on with just a single fog lamp burning in the gloom. The other Aston Coupe was also destined to be crashed by Prince Bira, just 50 yards from the Stewart wreckage, along with one of the DB Panhards. Indeed, 3 of the Astons crashed before nightfall. Ironically, the best Aston performance came from what was a belated and late entry for Carroll Shelby, which replaced a second Lagonda at the last minute. The Ferrari Cunningham was destined for engine failure after a broken rocker forced the team to run on 11 cylinders. Meanwhile, the leading car, still in the hands of the yellow-helmeted Gonzalez, was being caught and about to be overhauled by Moss in the leading D-type Jaguar. The rain got worse as we stood by the White House, a notorious crash corner for many a team in the past, and Aston's graveyard this year. In fact, Stewart was still running, but not for much longer. The Ferrari domination continued, but with the rain getting heavier, the Jaguars were now catching them. The privately entered Belgian C-Type was not painted its usual yellow. In fact, the intended car had been crashed on the way down to Le Mans, and so a replacement was hurriedly sent from Coventry. No time for a full respray, just a yellow stripe, even in black and white. 9 o'clock, and with 5 hours gone, all the Jaguar drivers were complaining of misfires, dirty fuel being blamed, so the fuel filters were removed. But then Moss, in car 12, had brake failure at the end of the Mulsanne Straight, and ended up down the escape road and out of the race. The Jaguar Challenge was in danger of fading fast. Gonzalez was now back in the lead, and only the Hamilton and Rolt Jaguar was able to apply any pressure in these appalling conditions. But the odds evened somewhat when the Marzotto Maglioli Ferrari went out with gearbox problems. Night always brings a special atmosphere to Le Mans, with the crowds disappearing to the several delights of the bars, the fairground, and, lucky for some, to their hotel bedrooms. Dawn on Sunday brought more drama. Gonzalez Trintignant still led and was still chased by the Hamilton-Rolt D-Type. The Rosier-Manzon Ferrari was third, ahead of the Spear-Johnson-Cunningham and the sole surviving Aston, the supercharged DB3S, driven by Roy Salvadori and Reg Parnell. Our usual Le Mans breakfast of coffee and croissants was followed by the sight of a routine pit stop for the third-placed Ferrari. But suddenly, routine turned to drama, and they were unable to rejoin the race. The Ferrari gearbox gremlins had hit them again, and the car was wheeled away into the dead car park. Around 10 in the morning, the D-Type had unlapped itself, and had an apparently comfortable 6 hours to make up just 14 kilometers. But then Tony Rolt was forced off the road by an errant Tolbo, and much valuable time was lost beating out the bodywork on the Jaguar. Two of the 3 4.9-litre Ferraris were out. Jaguar's hopes rose again when the lead Ferrari pitted and wouldn't restart for a few precious minutes. The Jaguar was now within 90 seconds and in the pouring rain, closing on Gonzalez. Driven by Spear and Johnston, the number 2 Cunningham was lying third, equaling Cunningham's best ever Le Mans finish, that of Fitch and Walters the previous year. The familiar, rotund shape of the plombeur appears with a smoke-stained Gauloise, as always, hanging from his lips, apparently completely oblivious to the fire hazard as he sealed the fuel filler. Bill Spear climbed back into the car to start his final spell. The Cunningham timekeepers were now ready to call in the number 1 car, as the approaching finish was, as usual, signalled by an Indian file of gendarmes taking up position along the pit lane. In came Cunningham number 1, and the plombeur removed the seal. Briggs himself was driving this car, partnered by John Bennett. They were headed for a 5th place finish behind the Belgium C-Type. 3rd and 5th was an excellent result for a private team, but as we shall see, it didn't suit the American. All was well with the car, the work to be done merely routine. Briggs himself would take the final spell. Then Spear came in again to hand over the 3rd placed number 2 Cunningham to Johnson for the finish. As the traditional 4 p.m. finish approached, the weather looked as dismal as it had 24 hours earlier. It didn't actually rain all the time, but it certainly felt like it, and the track never really dried out. There were now just 18 cars left of the 57 that had started. And with only a few minutes to go, the storm clouds gathered, and then the heavens opened, causing last-minute panic in the Cunningham camp. Caught out by the shower, Sherwood Johnson had spun and had to pit once again for a broken headlamp to be replaced. The D-Type splashed through, with Duncan Hamilton at the wheel for the last 12 laps. He had replaced Tony Rolt, whose goggles had misted up in the storm, while the Cunningham mechanics struggled on to replace the headlamp. Finally, at 4, the flag fell on the damp yet classic race. Gonzalez crossed the line with Hamilton less than 2 miles behind him. In spite of the weather, the distance covered had only just fallen short of the 1953 record. The Bristol team finished intact, the only team to do so, in 7th, 8th and 9th places. The Triumph TR2 finished 15th, and Cunningham arrived to receive the plaudits of his team and well-wishers, and as usual the stars and stripes were proudly displayed. Duncan Hamilton, who was so nearly a victor for the second year running. The 1500cc Porsche finished 12th, 2 places ahead of its baby sister, the 1100cc 356. As is now the tradition at Le Mans, the start-finish area was soon awash with an army of spectators from the stands.